Tonight, flying high in rural Saskatchewan, and why one First Nations man did what he believed was the right thing to do.
Oh my goodness, the best interest of the child is one of the reasons why First Nation kids are apprehended to begin with, and that's the problem.
The debate continues on the federal government's fix to the child welfare system.
Unfortunately, I do not think it will go very far, but no amount of money is going to ever take away the damage that's been done.
And the latest on the hearings for the Indian Day School settlement. Good evening, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen.
We begin tonight with a follow-up to a story we told you about yesterday. The village of Kelleher, Saskatchewan became famous on social media when images were posted of a house that had raised a Confederate and Nazi flag.
But it became even more famous when a live video was shared of a man taking down those flags and burning them. Early Saturday morning, hundreds of people watched the live video. It's up to more than 30,000 views as of today. The Melville RCMP said they received complaints about the flags and spoke to the occupant of the home. They were told the flags would be taken down after the rain stopped. But Caleb Peltier wasn't going to wait. He took the flags down himself. We talked with him earlier this afternoon.
To show that this isn't a joke, you know, this is real life stuff. Hate and racism, it goes a long way. The flags contributed to our veterans fighting and losing their life before us, and there's a lot of reasons that can go hand in hand into the situation of why I did it.
APTN will have more on this story and an in-depth interview with Caleb Peltier on tomorrow's episode of In Focus.
Discussion continued today in Ottawa about child welfare reform, called Bill C-92. One of its aims is to give Indigenous groups jurisdiction over child and family services. The House's Committee on Indigenous Peoples heard testimony on various ways to improve the legislation. As APTN's Todd Lamoran reports, though, one thing everyone agreed on was to add ways to ensure permanent and substantial funding.
Joshua Furlan was in care and knows the outcome of poor funding.
Kids do end up in just incarcerated, and or they join gangs, or they do all that kind of stuff, and it's, and if there's the proper funding to help people find employment, there's no reason why.
The House's Standing Committee on Indigenous Peoples heard from leaders from Manitoba and Saskatchewan. They support the quick passage of Bill C-92.
And if the laws and jurisdiction of First Nations are recognized properly, I think you'll see that communities have much more of an interest in their own well-being than people in Ottawa tend to think.
Conservative MP Kevin Waugh pointed out that many First Nations in Manitoba and Saskatchewan don't support the bill. Saskatchewan leader Morley Watson acknowledged a distrust of government.
Have that doubt that this is good for us, and so we are going to have in some of our communities very cautious communities that aren't sure, but for the most part we realize that if we're going to take control of ourselves, our lives, and our future, that we have to start somewhere.
Jocelyn Formsma of the National Association of Friendship Centres sees a problem of overlapping jurisdictions for urban people.
We worry that children are going to be either left out or they'll be subject to the cases that led to the unfortunate situation with Jordan's principal.
Pam Palmater believes the bill needs substantial amendment and question whether First Nations law will actually triumph when the best interests of the child are on the table.
That there is no independent recognition or status for First Nation laws that make them paramount. They're only considered to be a federal law, no different than a bylaw under the Indian Act.
Dan Vandal, the Parliamentary Secretary for Indigenous Services, took issue with Palmater's interpretation. He claimed First Nations law will trump provincial and federal law.
We're not talking the same thing here.
Okay, but read that very clearly. No federal law other than this act. And so in this act, sections 10 to 15 trump First Nation laws. So just there, that's a
which is
triumph
the best
over
interest
First
of the
Nation
child,
laws.
which is a pretty solid piece as well.
Oh my goodness, the best interest of the child is one of the reasons why First Nation kids are apprehended to begin with, and that's the problem. So it's allowing the status quo to trump First Nation laws. There's no definition here.
We're out of time.
Thank you.
C-92 still needs to go to third reading and then be sent to the Senate. It requires royal assent before the next federal election is called. Todd Lamoran, APTN National News, Ottawa.
For First Nations, having services rendered as tax-free on their territory, it's a right. But as one Mohawk man discovered, exercising that right is not always easy. Tom Fenario has that story.
Walter David is an award-winning coffee roaster. A big reason why his Moccasin Joe brand coffee is so popular is because he's meticulous.
These are off beans, and a lot of times these are unripe or bug infested sometimes at origin, and so they have to be separated. Otherwise it ends up in a cup.
Coffee isn't the only thing David is meticulous with. As a Mohawk, he's adamant about defending his rights. He recently had to dump his insurance company of 30 years because they insisted on charging him Quebec taxes, even though his home and business are in Kanesatake, Mohawk territory.
They wanted us to pay it and then get a reimbursement from the government. No, the principle there is you insulted us, and that's it. You insulted us by saying we don't exist.
David says the insurance company told him that Kanesatake is too much of a patchwork reserve to verify his claims of living there. The insurance company did not respond to APTN's request for comment. David says his dispute over taxes with the company is not recorded anywhere.
We asked for proof. We asked for it written. She refused to give it anything in written to us.
Walters would most likely be somewhere around here.
Grand Chief Sal Simon confirms that David lives and works within federally recognized reserve land.
He has certain inalienable rights, and he can't have that taken away from him. So if I allow this to happen to him, I allow it to happen to the rest of us. So it's within our collective interest to do something about that.
Quebec's own tax law clearly states that the provincial sales tax does not apply to services rendered on reserve to a status Indian. The Mohawk Council says they will intervene on behalf of David and anybody else who has their own non-taxable status threatened. And there are potential avenues when it comes to David's case. Because insurance is regulated, every province in Canada has an ombudsman that will investigate complaints. David says for him it's not about the money, but standing up for his rights as a Mohawk.
I think everybody here needs to get together on this whole issue.
In the meantime, David will keep roasting his coffee, even though Moccasin Joe is currently operating without insurance. Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Kanesatake, Mohawk Territory.
Hearings continued in Winnipeg today for the proposed Indian Day School settlement.
Details on that are coming up after the break, but first here's a look at tomorrow's weather forecast.
Starting on the East Coast, 4 with rain for Charlottetown and St. John's. Sunny skies and +3 in Nain, -1 in Inukjuak. -9 with showers for Val-d'Or, 11 above under sunny skies in Chibougamau. 15 with rain in Toronto, rain, and 16 in Ottawa. Sunny skies for Thunder Bay with a high of 16, 13 under the sun in Wawa. +2 with snow for Churchill, 15 in God's Lake. Rain and 19 for Winnipeg, 20 above with showers for Brandon. 18 and rain for Regina, 14 with rain for Saskatoon. Rain in Meadow Lake at a high of 11, sunny skies and 7 above in Uranium City. Welcome back. Hearings for the Indian Day School settlement rolled into day 2 in Winnipeg today. A federal judge heard from survivors and lawyers opposing the proposed settlement. But as Brittany Hobson shows us, some survivors say time is of the essence when it comes to approving the agreement.
Chris Stranger has waited nearly 50 years to share his truth. He is one of 25 survivors to address a federal court in Winnipeg on the second day of hearings into the proposed day school settlement.
Some of our people don't even know they're being abused. I didn't know I was being abused. I didn't think that school really mattered until I started to hear about the day school and I started to look at how it affected me.
In March, Minister of Indigenous Crown Relations Carolyn Bennett announced a new settlement package for survivors. Each entitled survivor could receive between $10,000 and $200,000, depending on their claims. Stranger says he's not in favor of all aspects of the settlement.
I just don't agree with the amount at the start of $10,000. And why I don't agree with that is because, like I said, there are going to be people that are not going to be able to say what really happened to them.
Other survivors echoed this. Margaret Swan is in favor of the settlement, but understands people's concerns.
Unfortunately, I do not think it will go very far, but no amount of money is going to ever take away the damage that's been done.
Changes have already been made because of statements made on Monday. The opting out period is extended from 60 days to 90. And the application period moves from 1 year to 2.5 years. Ray Mason created a survivors group called Spirit Wind. He says the settlement isn't perfect, but it's a start.
I think we could get more with this process, because with the Indian Residential School, you had no say on or input on what you felt you deserve.
He's concerned what a delay might do.
We need to have this completed as soon as possible, wound up as soon as possible, because, people are passing on by the day.
Wednesday is the final day of hearings. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
AFN Regional Chief Roger Augustine is one of those leading the charge for a day school settlement. He's in Winnipeg at hearings all week, and he joins us now to explain where things are at. How did we get to this point where we're in court?
Well, I think the residential school didn't really, somehow the restrictions to Indian day schools was applied. So Gary McLean, in my term, is the silent warrior at the time, thought that the day school should have been part of the package, and that didn't happen. So 9 years ago, he started this process, and today you see it all happening. I want to sort of take this special event, in my opinion, to honor him, a man that's created this day in the name of justice and the name of the spirit of peace and friendship.
There's not everybody is on the same page as this settlement hearings go on. We hear that there are people who object to this. There are people who aren't on the same side. Can you explain to our audience at home who might not be familiar with what's going on, what's the divide about among the day school survivors?
Well, a lot of it is money. And 9 years ago, when Gary started this process, a lot of the lawyers were given opportunity to take part. A lot of them couldn't find the necessary resources to take on these important cases. But now, when they have identified over $1 billion, then I'm finding now a lot of people are coming out of, don't want to say woodwork, but they are here and they're picking up clients left and right. The division is not real. The one part that I do understand, that the timing. One thing that I am very concerned about is that if we wait too much longer, there's thousands of First Nations people are dying, on a yearly basis. We're not going to be able to reach them, and there's a lot that has died. How do we reach them? What do we do for them? What do we say to them? And of course, the answer is there's nothing we can do. So while the lawyers are, trying to outsmart one another, people are suffering on the streets of our cities, suffering at home, and suffering, with loneliness and depression. We need to do something, and we need to do it now. And I believe that we shouldn't wait any longer.
Well, time certainly is of the essence when there's 2,000 people approximately dying a year, day school survivors dying a year. Thank you for taking the time to join us in studio to talk about what's going on at the courthouse.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been a great interview. Thank you very much. Thank you, APTN, and all.
Now to the 60 Scoop class action. Information sessions are being held from coast to coast to coast. to answer questions about the lawsuit claims. Our reporter Charlotte Mort-Jacobs caught up with one survivor in Yellowknife, eager for an apology from Canada.
As a kid, Roy Dahl had 13 brothers and sisters, but he never grew up with them.
My brother said that they just showed up at our door and said, "Your children are coming with us." And he went because myself and a younger sister apparently were taken.
Dahl is a Sixties Scoop survivor and part of a class action lawsuit.
And we're going to spend our whole lives processing all of this because we all feel a sense of alienation through it all. We don't feel like we belong.
He was adopted by white parents in Red Lake, Ontario, and grew up in close proximity to his birth family. Dahl recently attended the 60 Scoop information session, where he found both comfort and confusion amongst some who hope to include claims of abuse.
How do you bring those perpetrators to court to face those claims? And basically it's your word against theirs. So, I mean, I think that's the one saving grace to this settlement, is that's what this settlement says, is that Canada subjected us to a process that denied us our native heritage, that denied us our native identity.
Even with checks rolling out as early as next year, he will be watching to see what work the Healing Foundation, attached to the settlement, will provide.
He comes to us now and says, you know, you're still part of the family, Roy, or you're still part of our community. Why don't you come forward and sing with us? Why don't you come forward and drum with us? Nobody invites us to do that. And I think that's part of the missing link for us.
According to Collectiva, the claims administrator, any First Nation or Inuit person who was adopted or made a permanent ward and placed into the care of a non-Indigenous foster or adoptive parent is eligible for compensation. Applications are due at the end of August. Dahl has been waiting many years. What he values most, an apology on behalf of the federal government.
But until that happens, and a letter from Canada that says, you know, we're sorry we did this to you, you know, at that point, it's going to feel real. Yeah.
Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
The fire season is heating up on the West Coast.
And Bill Nye, the science guy, is getting fired up about a lack of action on climate change. These stories are still to come, but first, here's tomorrow's weather forecast.
Picking back up in northern Alberta, sunny skies and 12 above for High Level and Fort McMurray. Rain and 22 for Medicine Hat, 21 under the sun for Lethbridge. 17 and sunny for Vancouver, 18 for Victoria and Campbell River. Sunny and 15 for Fort Nelson, 1 degree warmer for Prince George. 12 above in Old Crow, 14 with rain for Whitehorse, 15 in Watson Lake, 15 for Fort Liard and Trout Lake, 5 above in Yellowknife, -3 for Sax Harbor, -1 in Pawlatuck, 3 above for Colville Lake, +3 for Baker Lake and Repulse Bay, 0 in Arviette with snow, -2 in Clyde River, +2 for Arctic Bay.
Welcome back. Killer whales have been spotted just off the shores of Vancouver recently, and as APTN's Tina House explains, Indigenous communities believe their presence is significant in many ways.
This pod of a mother killer whale and her 3 sons was filmed by Dennis Thomas in the Burrard Inlet. It's the second time in a week that 2 separate pods of killer whales were spotted in these waters.
Pure magic. So this area that we're looking at is the mouth of Indian Arm, and that's where we first captured the killer whales as they were coming back out.
A few days earlier, this mother and her 2 sons were also filmed just off Stanley Park, underneath the Lions Gate Bridge. Experts believe both are transient pods who are here to hunt. Ed Thomas from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation says the overabundance of harbor seals might have had something to do with the killer whales coming so close to the city.
Nature's call. I mean, they slaughtered a whole bunch of seals up there off Brighton Beach that day. There's proof and film, right? And there's no other reason why they came here, because we don't have a sea lion population. There's no otter or salmon right now that they could come up here and chase around other than the harbor seal.
For Kelselam of the Squamish Nation, he says that the resurgence of sightings of the killer whales holds an important meaning to Indigenous people.
For me, it's really special and sacred that our killer whales, which we view in our culture as our ancestors, that some of our past leaders, when they die, they actually come back as killer whales, as what we call yo-yos. And our elders talk about, you know, the value that they have in our community and our culture, and to see them coming back really talks to the possibility that we can have by having a clean inlet and clean environment and clean water.
For many years, this inlet has been heavily polluted from industry, and First Nations from the area have fought hard to protect the water. And for Dennis Thomas, he says it's his first time seeing them here, and filming the killer whales swimming in front of the Kinder Morgan's Westridge dock is symbolic.
As soon as I found out about them and I captured them, and they're actually captured the video, they're come swimming back down, I told my community, my administration office, all of them went outside door because they can actually see the inlet, and they got to see them from a distance. To actually see them in this inlet was just so powerful to me.
Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
Save our inlet. The BC Wildfire Service has deployed 2 helicopters and 28 personnel to battle a massive blaze just south of Kelowna. The Richter Creek wildfire is now estimated to be 80 hectares and considered out of control. An evacuation alert is in place. This is a notice to people to prepare to leave if an evacuation order is issued. Meantime, the Lejack fire west of Prince George is 70% contained. It is suspected to be man-made. 56 firefighters are on site there.
Bill Nye has had enough of the world's lack of progress on the climate crisis. The Fed Up TV scientist used some very colorful language to express his frustration in a segment on HBO's Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. Let's take a look.
Here, I've got an experiment for you. Safety glasses on. By the end of this century, if emissions keep rising, the average temperature on Earth could go up another 4 to 8 degrees. What I'm saying is the planet's on fire. There are a lot of things we could do to put it out. Are any of them free? No, of course not. Nothing's free, you idiots. Grow the up. You're not children anymore. I didn't mind explaining photosynthesis to you when you were 12, but you're adults now, and this is an actual crisis. Got it?
Well, it's not surprising to see that clip has gone viral on social media. It's been viewed millions of times.
And not the Bill Nye, the science guy that I recall from many years ago.
No, he was a little more chill when I was a teen.
I would have watched that more, though.
Totally.
That's your APTN National News for this Tuesday. You can find much more by visiting our website, including reaction to a story we broke yesterday involving an RCMP officer questioning an Indigenous youth during a sexual assault report.
And tune in tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern when that Nazi flag burning incident is just one of the issues that we're going to be putting in focus. Thanks for tuning in tonight. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Have a great night.
And I'm Dennis Ward. Laughing Drums next. Have a great night. See you back here tomorrow.